Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everyone. That was a great video. I think the dog was the highlight. I mean, bridges are great, but dogs are definitely where it's at. So good morning, or actually afternoon. My name is Alexandra Dom, and I am a board member with RPA. On behalf of RPA, I want to welcome you all to the second of 3 events in our CT Governors Forum series for the 2026 election season. I also want to welcome especially Representative Josh Elliott and thank him for participating in this important conversation and for your time and your great answers, which we're all about to hear. For over 100 years, RPA has been the leading research, planning, and advocacy organization in the tri-state area, mapping out a positive vision for our region to be more prosperous, equitable, and sustainable. RPA does this by publishing a once-in-a-generation regional plan that outlines goals to achieve the vision. RPA's 4th regional plan was published in 2017 and serves as the basis for how RPA determines its priorities as an organization, including for this election season in Connecticut. Terms like affordability and abundance are particularly resonant for voters in this election cycle, but RPA has taken a long-term view of these issues and has been focused on those concepts for a long time. RPA has outlined bold but practical and achievable goals for Connecticut across 4 deeply related issue areas, and you're going to hear Pete is going to ask questions about all 4 of them shortly. The first is building more homes of all kinds where people thrive. Number 2 is move Connecticut forward with modern, reliable transportation. Number 3, power Connecticut's clean energy future. And number 4, rebuild state capacity for effective governance. We're looking forward to hearing Representative Elliott's responses and thank him once again for attending. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pete Harrison, who is RPA's Connecticut Director, and he'll get the conversation going.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexandra. Welcome, everybody, and especially Representative Josh Elliott. And just a quick thank you to Josh for your co-sponsoring 5002 last session and for making it to Yimby Town last fall in New Haven. Our goal in this series and today with Representative Elliott is to raise the issues that we believe are critical to delivering a better Connecticut today and in the long term, to help the voting public understand how you think about these issues, and to start what we hope will be a productive conversation through this election cycle into the next 4 years and beyond. Just for folks, this is not a debate. We do not endorse candidates. It is just an educational platform to serve as a reference, both for voters and for the candidates. We have asked each of the campaigns for 45 minutes to cover questions on our 4 core issues that Alexandria just went through, as well as an additional short lightning round, and finally, audience questions at the end. We have shared topics, but not specific questions to each of the campaigns. In the interest of covering as many of these priorities as possible, we have asked the candidates to be as concise as they can be. I will not be asking follow-up questions, so that is where you, the audience, comes in. If you hear anything that you would like to have the candidate expand on, or don't hear something, please share in the webinar's Q&A feature. Shorter questions without commentary will have a better chance of getting asked, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible at the end. This series is being streamed on CTN, and we will be recording each forum. If there is a technical glitch at any point, we'll just pause to fix it and continue. Then we will be posting each of these forums online and on our socials for folks that couldn't make it. So look for those links in the near future. All right, let's get started. Good to go, Josh?
I am ready when you're ready.
All right. Representative Elliott, Connecticut is often ranked among the states with the highest housing costs and lowest production, highest transportation and energy costs, and the largest property tax burden. Some of these problems are longstanding in Connecticut, and some are certainly part of broader national trends. You have been a member of the General Assembly since 2018 and part of a majority party that has passed legislation on these issues, but has struggled to substantially lower costs. You are now asking to become governor and take the state in a different direction. We hope today's forum can cover what that vision looks like and why you believe you are the right person to lead the state. Our first topic is build more homes for all kinds of people where people thrive. Polls, including our own, show that housing costs continue to be one of the top concerns in our state, and we remain at or near the bottom of housing production in the country. Nearly 30% of homeowners and half of all home renters are housing cost burden, and there has been a 10% surge in homelessness in the last year alone. To increase affordability, security, and choice, we must build more homes and more kinds of homes, particularly in smart places with transit and other infrastructure. First question. Representative Elliott, now that the housing bill, now Public Act 25-1, is law, if elected, how would you plan to ensure that the state, councils of government, and municipalities create ambitious housing growth plans and, most importantly, follow through?
My concern, well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I appreciate it. And I will say, all that lead up in terms of where you come from, bear with me for a second, is all up for debate. And I would say that I align with the organization fully in terms of my belief that we do need to be building and we do need to be working on the supply issue, and that we can't just allow status quo to take hold because people are struggling to be here. So I abide with the entire premise of your question. I think it's important for me just to start there. The second bit, just talking about the politics, and of course I'll talk about what I would like to see, is that we have a supermajority in both chambers. We have 102 out of 151 Democrats, a supermajority in the House. We have 25 out of 36 in the Senate. And I get this question generally often. Well, you've been part of the majority. Why aren't these things already happening? And the reason is that not all Democrats think the same. And while we have a supermajority of Democrats, the supermajority number is 101. Not all are going to agree that we need to build more, that we need to be making these investments. And for some people, the status quo actually works fine. And that is what we're trying to get over. Inertia is what we're trying to get over. My belief for this campaign is a big distinction between myself and Ned Lamont is a status quo manager, where I am a reformer. And so what we saw in the 5002 to 8002 debate is that Ned Lamont didn't even know what was in the bill, which is when executive officials, 169 strong, various players were coming to the governor's office saying, we want to kill this bill because it's going to inspire more housing. That is when Ned Lamont vetoed the bill. But during the press conference, it was clear, didn't know what was in it, always asking his staff. I think whoever we hire for this position has to have a very strong perspective on what we want to see for policy. So the big change we saw from 5002 to 8002 was, instead of this top down from the state level, we saw more of a side by side from COGS, where COGS would say, we suggest you do this, very much opt in. Now, that said, even when it was coming from top down from the state level, it was still very much opt in as well. And my perspective along the whole time that we were debating this is that this was a very moderate move to ensuring that more building happens. Of course, focusing on transit oriented development, which I think was a good win, stayed from 5002 to 8002. But I myself would personally do away with parking limitations entirely and not have the necessity that towns and cities have, because of course we know that drives up the costs. I also would ensure that we would have smaller mandatory minimum lot sizes and massive investment. Now, when I look historically and see what had happened in times of housing shortage, most notably in the middle of the 20th century, we rarely invested in individually owned units, smaller units, whether that was eminent domain of hotels and motels to allow for short-term housing, or you're talking about right now something like building small modular and having a direct contact with the manufacturer to bring more units in. Because just 5 years ago, folk in the homelessness space were coming to the legislature saying, we are about 50 million shy of where we need to be. And if we don't make these investments now, people will begin to die in the streets. We did not make those investments. 5 years later, people are dying by the hundreds every winter. And that is due to stock, because the people who have either difficulties financially, difficulties with mental health reasons, for addiction reasons, they're always the ones who get shunted at the bottom and then don't have a way to resolve that. So all in all, what I would say is this: we at the executive level in government, from the state, need to be working, yes, with municipalities, using COGS and their expertise to be consistently pushing and using the carrot. At the same time, there is this tendency to be very fearful of the stick, and we cannot be simply relying on our urban centers to do all the building for us. Stanford, by some measures, was already at 18% affordable housing, and so just putting more housing to the same place, to me, is not going to solve the problem. And to your point, also, I don't think just luxury apartments will solve the problem either. I do think that more building is good, but we need to be having a fully comprised suite of building, because even if we were to build, let's just say, just luxury suites, we wouldn't get out of the hole that we're in for another 15 years. We know that we're at minimum 100,000 units shy of where we need to be, but at max it might be about 350,000. Either way, we have to start getting more units on board right now. I could talk for another 15 minutes on this question, so I will stop myself now if there's anything you want to sort of hone in on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And you touched a little bit on what would have been the third question for the housing section of just what additional zoning reforms do you think needed? And I heard you talk about more ambitious parking reform, minimum
Yeah.
lot size. Are there any other specific ideas, for some of the other types of homes that you've talked about?
Yeah, ADU as right, just easier conversion from commercial and office space to residential space. I mean, we've just seen after the pandemic the way that markets have shifted, and it's really going to manifest in places like Hartford specifically, where you're going to see this tax base take a dive in terms of commercial, and all of a sudden it's people who are living on fixed incomes in a town who are going to be shouldering more of that burden in terms of costs. And we'll talk about taxes because we need some massive overhaul there too. One thing that I took away from YIMBY Town, interestingly, was just this perspective of what the red states are doing so well compared to us. And yes, it's the laws that they put into place, but those laws manifest from a mentality, and that mentality is this idea that if you are a property owner, you should be able to do with your property as you want. And we here in the state feel like we believe that, but we don't. We actually say, if you are a town administrator, you can decide what people individually do with their property. And that is the fundamental problem of where we're at, because it allows people to put their arms up. And I don't take the cynical perspective, which is to say that every time this happens, it's because people are racist. I do think that the manifestation of this happening is racist in impact. I don't believe it's racist at its core. And I think we need to be able to do a better job of pushing the things that we want without using that as the cudgel, but recognizing that if we don't do what we need to do and build more housing, the outcome is going to be the same thing as racist redlining as we saw in the middle of the 20th century. So we have to be wide-eyed about the outcomes of what is happening with status quo to determine the importance of our work, but that can't be what we do to bring people in, because ultimately we have to bring center and center-left town administrators in, because they were a large part of why the bill originally failed as 5002. But we also can't just be asking for permission over and over and over again, because we are just going to be back to where we were 10, 15 years ago, and we need to be moving the ball forward.
Yeah, and last question on housing, something that came up in YIMBY Town as well. Increasingly across the country, outdated building and fire codes have been seen as a barrier to building smaller, missing middle housing multifamily buildings, which often have higher homeownership opportunities, which we desire a lot in Connecticut. Do you plan to take a lead in reforming, either legislatively or administratively, Connecticut's building codes to encourage safer forms like single stairway, smaller elevators, or more manufactured or innovative models that you mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. I think you can't be doing one or the other. Whoever becomes governor will need to use the executive branch regulatorily to cut down on unnecessary red tape, recognizing that we can't be moving backwards on safety wholesale, that we need to be making sure that whatever we build, people are going to be safe in for a long time, and that there are modes of egress and there are ways of fire suppression and everything that we need. At the same time, if you are just layering in over and over and over all these additional things that builders have to do, then the numbers aren't going to work out. Now, if we were willing to subsidize because of the regulations that we put into place, different question. But we know from the 80s, when a massive amount of disinvestment occurred from HUD, 08, 09, when a massive amount of disinvestment occurred from the crash, that we don't have the same level of subsidy that was coming from the federal government. And I'm not in a position to say that all has to be backfilled by the state, but I do think that some has to be backfilled, some amount of building has to be backfilled, even if that's going to be housing authority specifically and nothing else, and maybe not giving it to the private market, but having more publicly owned, subsidized housing. But yes, we need to ensure that both law and regulation allow for the numbers to work for the private market, and being really clear-eyed, bringing people that are in the industry in so that we know exactly where the points of contention are. Because to your point, one of those big points is parking. Those big points are, the size of those elevators, which are incredibly expensive. The stairwells, which are incredibly expensive. So yes, it is a fine balance. And we do need to be mindful of not swinging the other way and saying just build, 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 build. We don't care what happens. No, we need to be consistent and methodical, but also push the ball forward.
Yeah. Our second topic is move Connecticut forward with modern, reliable transportation. Our state has some of the worst highway congestion, above average lengths of commute, and some of the highest household transportation costs in the nation. In addition, nearly 30% of households in cities like Hartford and New Haven do not own a car and must rely on transit systems with limited utility. A more robust and reliable transit system would benefit all of us and make it easier to meet our state's economic and environmental goals. First question. RPA believes buses should be the top priority for enacting this vision, but currently we have a disjointed network of 17 systems with limited frequency, connections, and unintegrated fare boxes. How would you create a fast and fair bus network?
Yeah, it all comes down to the way that you manage and how you bring your team together. And it's going to be a combination of bringing local leaders together. It's going to be bringing agencies together, having an idea of where you want to go. Because if you don't know where you want to end up, there's no way to muddle your way anywhere. So to your point, the goal should be more often and consistent and reliable and affordable fares. And what's going to happen as we are changing people's perspective, because when I travel, I try to use the public transportation system, and I'm always envious of places that we go, always hopeful and wishful that we could have something like that here in our state. The closest train to me would be 20 minutes away. Sometimes I use it when I go into New York City, and it's nice to have. I found that for myself. Bus is it's just not. It doesn't make sense for the way that I navigate my life. But that should be a red flag, because if it's not possible for me, it's not going to be possible for a lot of people. Therefore, people aren't going to use it. That's always the way that I think of how things affect me, and then go from there. So we need a significant investment. Now, the issue is that it might be that this is not something that is profitable, because for some reason, we've got into our head that these services have to break even or make money, which doesn't make any sense. This is a government service. And if we are going to get people on board, we need not weeks or months of reliability and affordability. We need years of reliability and affordability. Because if somebody trying to get to their work one day and the bus isn't there, they will never be able to trust that system ever again. If you are relying on these things to get to the hospital, to see a loved one, whatever the case may be, you will never use that system again. You need to make sure that it works every time, all the time. And so you are going to have somebody who's willing to make that investment up front and then stick with it, even when the numbers of ridership slowly increase. Because it's not like you make that investment and all of a sudden it's going to go like this. It will take time to build trust with the public, because I think ultimately that's what's happened, is that we have lost the trust of public. You're talking about trains for a moment. I just know going from New Haven to New York City is a half hour longer than it used to be 25 years ago. And that's going to be, let alone the environmental, let alone the quality of life, let alone the more investment we would have to make in the road because more people are using the road. It's also just, it hurts our economy. There's so many reasons we should be investing in our public infrastructure. And I think buses are those specifically where people who need that help the most is where we should be starting.
You just even jumped into my second question, which is the vision for rail. And I'll just say, proximity to New York City, the Northeast Corridor is a huge economic and social advantage for Connecticut, but trains are slower today than they were decades ago. And obviously patterns of ridership have shifted since COVID. So yeah, what is just quickly your vision for rail service in Connecticut?
I want to make sure that we are investing in things that are environmentally sound and safe so that we aren't relying on dirty sources of energy. I want to make sure that we are connecting to Boston so we can have people go up and down the whole northeastern corridor. I want to make sure that there are more stops, and I want to make sure that there are more lines so that if you do need to get somewhere quicker, there is a way that you can get to a place quicker with less stops. And I think you need both of those things. I would love more hubs. If there was a hub in Hamden, and yes, I know there's one in New Haven, if there wasn't one in Hamden, I would be using it all the time. The difference for me of 20 minutes versus a 5-minute drive is enough where it's like, okay, it's not worth my time on either end. So that last mile really matters. And I know it's an expense, but it's an expense that I think is incredibly important for us to be making. So there you go.
Yeah, and you've alluded to this a little bit, but for the final question, stable funding is a critical need for good public transit, which obviously bus and rail, but also microtransit, that last mile, as you described. But Connecticut DOT has reported various times that the main source of transit funding, the Special Transportation Fund, is in trouble. How do you plan to fund the types of investments you would like to see in public transportation?
It's been in trouble, and we were saved by the pandemic because of all the federal money. But we rely right now incredibly on the gas tax, and the gas tax we know is an unreliable long-term source of revenue as we move more and more towards electric vehicles. So that can't be the long-term solution. We all know that when Ned took office, that he was pushing for tolls, and it ended up in a massive failure. He had a approval rating of 40%. And what ended up happening was that the message of what we were trying to do kept changing week over week. There's no real leadership in saying, here's how we're going to get there. And then also selling it to the public, because ultimately it is this. It is that we can either pay for all of our roads, or we can pay for 2/3 of our roads and have other users from outside the state pay for the other third. That is the calculation, because the roads are going to get paid for either way. So I am pro tolls. I'm still pro tolls even 10 years, 8 years later, however long it is, because what I think it needed was a better messenger. Because the fact is that we are going to have to find revenue for this. I do want to specify that tolls are regressive. And as part of my overall tax package, I do not think tolls are the end all be all. I do think as a user fee, asking for trucks that are doing 1,000 times more damage than an individual car, it is fair to be going after them at a little heavier rate, trying to find ways that people commute to work. People that have of lesser means to be able to means test the fees. There are various ways where we can be constructing these tolls and to not just be on the border towns, because that is unconstitutional, to make sure that it is as fair for Connecticut residents as possible. But we're paying for these things either way. Then on the other side of that, we should be having a much better income tax structure, a graduated income tax structure, because right now the statistic that I will share with the audience, that I will share every time, which drives me in this campaign, is that the top 4,500 income earners in our state pay less than 8% of their income to state and local taxes, while the bottom 1.2 million income earners in our state, that's a third of our state, pay over 20%. And that's part of the over-reliance on the property tax and the under-reliance on the progressive income tax. Now, if we want to implement something like tolls to make sure that the STF doesn't go bankrupt, it doesn't go empty, it's going to have to be continuing to offset by a better tax. And so this is part of an overall tax structure that I would be talking about.
Yeah, excellent. Our third topic is powering Connecticut's clean energy future. The state has passed climate objectives for 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Connecticut is currently projected to achieve just 34% and 44% reductions, respectively, falling short of our goals. Furthermore, even though Connecticut generates a considerable amount of power for New England, our residents have the fourth highest utility bills in the nation. We must modernize our energy infrastructure and oversight to transition to a more affordable and sustainable energy strategy. First question: despite our emission mandates, many advocates don't think that they are as ambitious as they should be given the scale of the climate crisis. Do you agree with the state's current emission goals? Why or why not?
Oh, it's a five-alarm fire right now. I mean, we'd be doing everything we can immediately to be investing dramatically in renewable energy, whether it's solar or wind or geothermal or tidal. I also am, I will say, unnecessarily supportive of nuclear to get from point A to point B, recognizing that the right here, right now problem that we face is carbon in the atmosphere, and the less carbon emission that we can be producing, the better. I will say that when Ned Lamont talks about energy production, he says historic investment in renewable and also historic investment in natural gas pipelines, which we see he is allowing to come in on both corners of the state. And when you make investments in dirty energy, it gets you into decades worth of usage of more of that dirty energy. The problem, and I use this in quotation marks, of clean energy is that it comes with an incredible upfront cost and that it bears out over time. It ends up being more cost effective over time. But that means then you have to make these investments now. It's why just 4 years ago, Ned Lamont pulled us out of a deal with Rhode Island and Massachusetts for more offshore wind. And now both of those states kept on moving forward and they're bearing the benefit of that, and we aren't. We need to be willing to make these investments now, and we need to be making them largely. And the problem, and again, I say the word problem, is that the money has to come from somewhere. And I always say this, it's going to come from one of three places. It's going to come from the working poor, it's going to come from the middle class, or it's going to come from the wealthy. And over, we've been saying, well, it's going to be the middle class because we can't ask the rich to do it because they'll leave. The working poor don't have money. So we've been asking for 4 decades the middle class to take care of these bills. Now, my problem is that if the ultra wealthy can be paying 8% while the rest of us pay 20%, there's certainly room for them to chip in a little bit more to make sure that we have breathable air, drinkable water, and a planet that is not just heating up and making it unlivable for the next generation. We have to be making these investments right now, and we know how to do it. It's just money. And once we do that, we can also be bringing the cost of energy down. I mean, the next thing down the line for us, and I don't know if it's going to come up during this conversation, are AI data centers. And as they populate the US, each data center takes about a small city's worth of energy. And that pulls from the grid and brings up costs for everybody else out. And as we're building more energy to then allow for these data centers, the question is, where is that energy going to come from and what kind of energy is it? We have to be aggressive now.
Actually, we don't have any AI questions. That was an interesting debate internally with us. So, costs in Connecticut are not quite good enough that we're getting a lot of the data centers, but that is an absolute major question that we're thinking about a lot internally. For the second question, you mentioned this a little bit, but just to get sort of a clear vision, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the current mix of generation in Connecticut, it's 62% gas and oil, 34% nuclear, technically 1% renewable, but Revolution Wind coming online is going to bring that up to 5% and 1% hydro. So you have talked about this a little bit, but what is your ideal mix of energy sources?
I mean, gas, oil, coal needs to be as close to zero as we can possibly get it. That has to be it. I'm okay with all the rest. Anything that is carbon emitting is what we need to be moving away from. Uh, I also, when we talk about cost, I talk about a public option. And when I talk about a public option, what I mean is this, is that we here in Connecticut have Eversource and UI. These are IOUs, investor-owned utilities, and they're making a profit. And we have incredible regulatory capture within our state government right now, and it's been this way for decades. And why I talk about this is that across the U.S., 30% of energy is distributed publicly, not privately, like through these IOUs. There's Nebraska, which the entire state delivers their energy publicly. In our state, in Connecticut, there are 6 towns that deliver and transmit their energy publicly, and they are 30 to 40% less expensive than the private industry because there's no profit. Because Eversource doubled their profits from last year to this year, and they're now at $1.6 billion in profit. Their CEO makes $15 million a year. When we are the most expensive state in the country for energy, that is going towards private shareholders. And we can resolve this problem by allowing municipalities the option of purchasing their grid at a fair value, because it won't work if they just hike up the rates and then we have to spend all this money to pay it down. That doesn't make it cheaper. That just is a massive giveaway to these private companies. We need to be valuing fairly at book value. And we know over the past 20 years, about 60 different municipalities across the US have tried this. 9 have been successful. And the reason I say that is because I want everyone to know that this is a hard thing to do, but we can learn the lessons from the places where it's worked and learn the lessons from the places where it hasn't. And having a leader who wants this to happen is also really helpful. This can't be something that is only grassroots driven. It has to be grassroots advocates and elected officials, because you're fighting against the billionaires who are ownership of all these organizations. So that to me is what our goal needs to be, because then once we collectively, organizationally, in government, have the control over energy distribution, we can do a better job of ensuring that the energy that we take in is coming from renewable sources.
Yeah, and I think the final question here you touched on a little bit, but there is the contradiction of, we think long-term investment in renewables, as you said, is a significant upfront cost relative to fossil fuel, but voters demand lower costs now. So how do you see, just in quickly in 30 seconds, like balancing that and messaging that to voters that long-term relief is in renewable transition, but how do you solve long-term challenges that folks have with energy costs?
Gotta fix the tax system. Gotta fix the tax structure. It is that simple. For the ultra wealthy, a slightly more of a tax ends up being a number on a screen. For people that are in the middle class, it is your actual day-to-day life and your ability to survive in the state. That is the underlying friction, is that it is cost now versus a livable earth later. And we just have to have leaders that are in government who understand the difficult trade-off that exists. And there doesn't really have to be a trade-off. There were times historically in the US where we asked the wealthy to pay, this is federally, 94, 92% for a few years, but 70% for decades. By Reagan, it dropped down all the way to 35%. We can't be surprised that we aren't making investments in the infrastructure we know we need to make, because we have lost the will to be asking those hard asks, making those hard asks. The reason that I'm running for governor is because I'm up against somebody who makes $55 million a year in passive generational banking income, has spent $70 million of his own money to buy the seat. There's no reason for him to make these changes, because it's going to be all of his friends that ultimately have to pay more. That is why, a big part of why I'm doing this. I've seen over the last 8 years under Ned, I've been elected for 10, the way we simply cannot be making large investments. We are not allowed to be making large investments. And I think that we don't have a choice. If we care about the future of our state, of our earth, our planet, our air, our water, our climate, we have to be making these big decisions now.
Our final topic is rebuild state capacity for effective governance. Connecticut's significant needs, which you've talked about at length with housing production, public transportation, modernization, and energy grid transformation, depend in large part on the state's capacity to implement them. After decades of fiscal constraints, in many cases, state agencies, local governments, and COGs are under-resourced, lack necessary technical assets, and have limited strategic clarity and coordination between levels of government. If we want to solve our state's biggest crises, we need to rebuild the machinery of efficient government. First question, many major cities are smaller today than they were generations ago, but our cities remain economic and cultural centers that we believe to be are critical to our state's responsible growth. What is your strategy to unlock the potential in our urban centers?
So there's this interesting resentment between those who live in smaller towns and our urban centers. That resentment is that all the resources of the state go towards our urban centers, and it's wasted. Because of the way that the property tax is levied, and that government institutions can't be taxed, and because nonprofits and hospitals and educational facilities, religious institutions can't be taxed, there are massive swaths of untaxable property in urban centers. Urban centers also where we have made sure through our zoning laws house the neediest among us. already we need to be providing more resources to places where they don't have the ability to tax at the same rate that they do in other places, while we don't send enough money back from the state. It is a perfect storm of bad policy, a perfect storm. We have been disinvesting in our urban centers for a very long time. And the first thing we have to do is just pull ourselves away from the property tax, which is truly a middle class wealth tax. If you see what is happening in states across the US where a wealth tax on the wealthy is being considered, and the amount of panic that the wealthy feel, this is the tax that we voluntarily choose to use on middle class families, which is what makes it harder and harder to live, which is why the age of a first-time home buyer is now 40 years old. When people come out of college, they have decades worth of debt to their name. We are not building generational wealth in the middle class. We are dismantling the middle class. And a big part of that right now is just simply the way that we tax. So the first thing is just straight investment. And it's investment on all the things we've talked about. It's been 13 years since the education cost sharing grant formula has been increased, meaning that places that can absorb these costs, like Greenwich, continue to make those investments, and places that can't, like Bridgeport, don't, which means that the difference in terms of educational outcome becomes wider and wider every year, as we have some of the wealthiest people that have ever existed in the history of our planet. Because HR1, when it passed last year, was $1.5 trillion giveaway to millionaires and billionaires at the cost of our safety net. And a lot of those folk disproportionately live in our state. So when we say that we can't have an education system where zip code does not determine the amount of investment that we make, we're being factually wrong. It's factually wrong. It is a matter of will. And so it might also be, because I've heard this said, well, you can't just throw money at the problem. And yet, if you pull money away, it does seem to make the problem worse. I would push back on this idea that you can't just throw money at the problem. You can't do it blindly. You have to be thoughtful about the way that money is used. But when Neville Mott sits at a Westport library and says that Bridgeport doesn't need librarians because when we send them money, they waste it, that's the mentality that occupies that seat right now, that views cities as an obligation, as a cost, as opposed to an investment in our future. Because the people that come through our education system are going to make up the next generation of what Connecticut is. And we can either say it's okay to have this massive divide and we condone it, or it's probably better to say we need to make sure that we're building out a better, bigger middle class with more educated folk, because that is what will bring businesses in, because we have a pipeline, we have better educated people who can create culture. And that's the most important thing that I think long-term that we can do for our state, because I fully agree, again, with the premise of the question, is that major and massive investment has to be made in our hubs. It can't just be New Haven, which has Yale, and Hartford has massive problems in terms of the way that's been built up and having a highway go right through the middle of the city. Waterbury and Bridgeport, we know, were big manufacturing hubs, and now all of a sudden, once that goes away, it just the base falls out from the bottom. There's so much opportunity here, but it requires state intervention that we have not been providing.
And relatedly to that, in terms of state intervention, if you had a magic wand, what are 3 things that you would change to create a more integrated, innovative, fiscally sustainable state bureaucracy to meet these conservation and development goals, whether our cities, rural or suburb?
I would be using data to look at outcomes, whether it's like maternal health or race and educational attainment, and see where investments need to be made. I would eliminate the property tax entirely, have one tax and one tax alone, and that would be the income tax. Everything else is regressive, and I want to move away from regressive taxation. The state would then, by metric, send money back to municipalities that have the greatest need to make sure that there is fairness across the board. I would be ensuring that we weren't dead last in terms of investment in our bringing people in and arts and culture. We do a very bad job of highlighting our state. But ultimately, if we want to be perceived as a business-friendly state, that is investment in infrastructure, investment in our cities to make them more walkable, to make them more bikeable, to make them safer, to have more roundabouts, to have narrower roads, to have more bus lines that are coming and going more regularly. You said three things, right? I'm just going to keep on going. We need to make sure that we invest in our trains so that people want to go into the city and come back for a night. That's great. We want to make everything so much easier for people because when you leave Connecticut and you go to other cities, other states, other countries, you see what people who love their state, their country do. They invest in themselves. It is a reflection of how we view ourselves, the fact that we have been unwilling to make hard asks, to make big investment. It's been such a long time. Fix our tax structure, make big investment. That's it. Two things, ultimately.
Well, and you mentioned this on the last question for this topic, with some of your discussion about tax changes, but obviously, not surprisingly, RPA is interested in regionalization and sharing burdens or sharing different cost structures. And obviously, many voters and municipalities are concerned about the property tax burden. I think you've obviously talked about some of your tax policy ideas at the state level, but just talk a little bit quickly, what role of regionalization of other services do you see as part of this, or do you not see regionalization as part of this?
I think regionalization is part of it. We're the only state in the country that doesn't have counties. And so what happens when you don't have a county-based system, specifically with education, is what you would normally have is you would have equalization of property taxes within that county. So you would have Greenwich and Bridgeport would have the same mill rate, and you would have West Hartford and Hartford would have the same mill rate. And the problem here is that you have a town like Hamden, which has a mill rate of 53, and a town like Greenwich, which has a mill rate of 11. And on its face, the property taxes are aggressive, and it becomes so much worse when you take these other measures into account. So that is why I think the property tax is so bad. And you can look to what Massachusetts did, where they levied a 4% surcharge on people making $1 million or more. They did this about 3 years ago. They have more millionaires and billionaires than they had before. They expected $2.2 billion over a 2-year period. They took in about $5.7 billion. They're doing all the things that we say that we can't do, whether it is implementing fully free breakfast and lunch for kids in our school system, something the governor's been killing every year, except during an election year, he allows breakfast to go through, talking about permanent and fully refundable child tax credits for affordability for working families, something the governor has been steadfastly killing every year. But the property tax reform has to be the number one thing that we work on. And I'm not creating this. Bill Curry ran this 20 years ago. But I think a really important part is also to figure out the message, figure out who is sending it, also getting a lot of people on board to understand why it's such a problem.
All right. Well, that wraps up the 4 core question areas for our 2026 priorities. In the interest of time, Josh, we're going to do our rapid lightning round of questions. And I'll try to get to all of them here. But first one, and they can be short answer or one-word questions, so we can get through a lot of them. Number 1, favorite building in Connecticut?
Favorite building in Connecticut? Oh my God, I should know the answer to this. I love our Capitol. I just love our Capitol building. I've been to other capitals and it's gorgeous there. Yeah, our Capitol.
Favorite public park?
Public park. I like Worcester Square. Worcester Square is cute. I'm
Did
very New
our
Haven
meet up
centric.
there last weekend. Favorite non-Connecticut U.S. city?
Um, I love Burlington. I went to college, Ithaca, and it's the same town planner, urban planner, and so there's a lot of similarities. But I love Burlington, Vermont.
As you probably know, the parking reform that we fought for and got in Public Act 25-1 comes into effect tomorrow. As a very broad statement, parking in Connecticut, too much, not enough, or just right?
Oh, it depends on where you are. I mean, when you're finding density in urban centers, I would say there's two, and I say this against interest because I love street parking, but there's really too much, and you need more space for bikeability. Because I love my e-bike. So it just depends on where you are.
Fair enough. Yes, very, very technical answer, but I suspect that'll be common in the rest of these. Fair enough. You mentioned biking, but and trains, but when was the last time you took a bus trip?
It would have been somewhere out of state, and it's been long enough I can't remember because I have not taken a bus in Connecticut. But I think it was probably New York City, and it was over a decade ago.
Okay, last tough lightning round question. What
Yeah.
population do you think Connecticut should be in 2050? You can say a percentage, a raw number. It's
Oh,
3.6
what
million now.
what population? I think by what year?
2050.
By 2050. So in 14 years. Um, I would say like 3.9 million. Let's stay under 4 million. But let's
Appreciate
have
the
let's have a little bit of
specificity.
growth. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, last two questions here. Where are you spending 4th of July?
It's my one weekend I was gonna go to Willimantic for the Boombox Festival, and I feel so guilty. This is really like a sore subject. I really wanted to go, but I don't take weekends off because I'm running for governor, and it's gonna be like a full 30-day sprint, and I just wanted to like not burn out. So we are going to Warwick, Rhode Island, and we will
Nice.
not be in state for those 2 days.
Don't feel guilty. That wasn't a gotcha. Like candidates are entitled to trying to recharge the battery and see
I
family.
do feel guilty. I feel
No,
like
I
I should be
appreciate
here. I
that.
want to go to all the parades, but it is what it is. It's all good.
All right, final lightning round question then. Who do you got winning the World Cup?
Oh, US. Come on, man. We're killing it. We're killing it. It's
All
exciting
right.
as
I mean,
somebody who grew up.
they look like contenders, but that's
They're
quite the
contenders.
politician answer. Um,
Listen, I've been watching them for I'm 41 every single time, not making it very far. And it just seems like this is a year where we're like pretty competitive. When you had that 4-1 win against Paraguay, it was like, okay, we're like we and then they had that loss, that third game loss, which is like but
yeah,
it
but
didn't
nothing
change
major.
outcome at all. I think I'm hopeful. I love
I
the World Cup.
appreciate
I
that. And
really
look,
don't care, but yeah,
it'll age very well if they do win.
there you
So
go.
we are running a little bit over, so I apologize to folks on the Q&A, but we're going to ask just one audience question and then we'll wrap up just to respect everybody's time here. The only question, sorry, will be what role do you feel that the state plays in responding to homelessness and housing unaffordability? What role should the state play in that?
So I'm close with the folk over at Desk, Steve Orland, the ED, and all of our food pantries and soup kitchens they're the canary in the coal mine. And we just know that the amount of need is starting to skyrocket. And need as pertains to food is going to trickle over into the housing space, and it has been. And we are only going to solve the acute problems that we have by solving the chronic problems that we have. Now we can have quick fast cash infusements for like short-term stays for people, but that's not the solution. The solution is we need more stock and more available affordable housing. So when I first started 10 years ago, and I know it's a short question, but when I first started 10 years ago, we were number one in the US in terms of outcomes for veteran homelessness. And we have since come down to about middle of the pack because it's one of those things when you begin to have success, you're like, okay, don't need to make investments anymore. The homelessness space, protecting unhoused people is something we have to be making investments in year after year after year after year, making sure agencies and all of our protective organizations are working together in a unified way to make sure that we're keeping track of people so that people are getting the resources that they need and getting the support that they need. But we need it's just resources delivered in a way that is unified and structural.
All right. Yeah. And I appreciate again. Sorry for folks that submitted questions. We had some great ones. We just want to be respectful of time. So that should be the wrap up for today. On behalf of RPA, I want to first thank you, Josh, for being here with all of us this afternoon. And thank you all for participating in the audience. We will be concluding the series on July 9th at 11 a.m. with Senator Ryan Fazio. We will be posting this recording soon. And we do have a few other events coming up that we will share in the chat and an email following up. We have a Pro Homes nonpartisan training on the 28th. And then we have a report release, Homes on Track Part 2 on the 29th. And just as a reminder, the Democratic primary is on Tuesday, August 11th, and the general election is on November 3rd. So Joss, just want to say thank you again. Please don't feel bad about having some time to yourself and your family on the July 4th. But for the rest of you, hope you have a happy and safe 4th of July.